Like, to what extent have we had the duty of care, using a term from either Simple Law now?
Young Australia 21 has embarked on this project of Smarter About Drugs to basically drive young people's input into this conversation.
I think like part of the society as a whole though would be media as well.
Yeah, because media is a huge thing.
It started in 2014 with a workshop in South Australia where we had a large group of young people engage with experts in drug policy and talk about the issues that really matter to them and looked at the way that drug and alcohol issues affected them in their communities. That was so successful that Young Australia 21 decided to put together a conversation pack that allowed similar conversations to be had in schools and other places that young people go to really facilitate those conversations and empower young people to be part of the conversation at the national level and in their communities. So we've partnered with the Australian Lions Drug Awareness Foundation to work on the pack and distribute it across Australia, and that has been a fantastic partnership.
I think if ever a school is doing anything with regard to drugs and alcohol, they need to set the context of the private life and the private choices of the students, so they understand that the choices which they make depend on the level of information which they've got, but also their ability to understand the consequences of the behaviours. And I think that once we get that and get that through to students, and they often take the conversations home. So it's more than just what the students are actually doing themselves, it's also they're feeding back what they discuss with their own parents, with their own peers, and then if you then study the policy is actually taught within the context of the conversations that they've already had with their own families, and that's, very powerful.
Going home after a lesson, talking about this, just discussing it with family and everything, it really opens your eyes and opens other people's eyes as well. Even at lunchtimes, talking with friends, it really gets the conversation going about what issues there are and what needs to be dealt with.
Is there the link between what a young person observes in the adults in their life and their own social behaviour?
If it's always constantly seen on like ads and stuff, people...
They do drug ed, but they don't look at the policies behind it, and I think there's the need for young people to realise that they can play the role in the policies of the future, and there's one thing to educate them about the risks of drugs, but the other thing to give them an empowerment that they can actually do something themselves to try to shape policy.
Drugs are hard to talk about between friends, without glorifying them, I guess. It's always talked about really casually. We always talk about how, people use them, how we know people who use them, what we've seen in the streets with people using them, but we don't talk about what impact drug policy and drug users being punished has on their lives and the negative impact that has on the rehabilitation of drug users. And I feel like if we were more informed about how it negatively affects their lives, we would have more drive to do something about it, to strive for change.
Making that judgment is really difficult and is a really complex judgment to make on the spur of the moment. So what I'd like you all to do, working in the groups that you're in, could you work through what do you think we can do for an individual, local community, the society, the media and the government? I actually used it in a politics class looking at the effect of drugs on an individual and the choices which they can make. For the students to understand the context was very important. So they look at their own lives and then they move from there to the global, and that helps them to understand that there's more than just the policies involved, there's also the choices.
I guess it's just kind of interesting to learn how much of a growing issue this can be within Australia and how it really needs to be fixed so that we can make our community safer.
Yeah, okay, society as a whole.
They realise that the impact of a policy which is not a very good policy can be deaths and injuries, and they realise that they have the responsibility, I think, to take a role rather than just accepting that this is what the government says. I think one of the problems in our society now is that there's a feeling that that's the way that things are and there's nothing that we can do, and if they don't have that view then they can actually shape the future.
Some of the solutions that we have in play in Australia aren't exactly the best ones, and we're trying to take a different approach in how to help our nation end the drug war.
So we've looked at Australia and also the global policies with regard to drug use and certainly the punitive approach of some of the countries.
They need to be more focused on rehabilitation rather than enforcing, harsh punishments on drug users.
We're deterring rehabilitation, we're making it harder to get help, we're making it harder to get better, rather than helping drug users. By throwing them in jail, it's only going to make it worse.
Yeah, so in Sydney they have drug injecting rooms, safe injecting rooms, and it's kind of helped them get off the streets and make communities safer when it comes to drugs. So that's an important thing.
On an international level, I think the medically supervised injecting centres around the world, especially in Canada and Switzerland, there's definitely been brilliant results there. It's been proven it saves lives, and I think we really need to consider that.
Well, the example that Portugal decided to adopt was like a rather progressive idea, and they decided to decriminalise the use of all drugs after a big heroin epidemic, and the results have been really positive from that. And not only has it helped save lives, it's been supported by the majority of the people that live there. And on a state level, the example of the medically supervised injecting centre in King's Cross, where there's been an 80% reduction in ambulance call-outs, as well as a halving in the number of discarded needles publicly, is another example of how two different locations have combated the issue of drugs in a progressive way.
I think China's policy move is quite interesting because they've moved from a more punitive approach to one where people who are using drugs can access help a lot more easily. And I think it's quite interesting, and it speaks a lot about, how big this issue is globally now.
The main learning which has actually come out of this is the level of interest in the pack, but also what they've done with it, and the level of conversation within the class, among their own peers as well, among even the teachers outside of the subject. It's flowed across the subject as well, and that tends to indicate to me that what's contained within the pack tends to resonate with them and really helps them to understand that what we're doing is a global issue, just not to do with their lives, it's to do with a much broader range of ideas.
Yeah, it's been really good. It's helped us learn a lot, and it's been really enjoyable.
Yeah, I think it just informs us more about the consequences of using drugs and alcohol and how it can affect families as well, and friends, and just everyone in society.
Yeah, it was really fun and informative, and it really helps you open up your mind.
It's what schools have to do.
We all have the ability to make healthy choices, and as we in Lions Australia know, stronger communities built on compassion and understanding, one of the best protective gifts we can nurture for our young people and our young citizens.
We hope to take this conversation pack even further so that more young people can be involved in this really important conversation.